Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, please. Thank you, and we'll begin. Well, good morning. I'm Tom Axworthy, Public Policy Chair at Massey College, and I'll be your MC for the day and trying to keep us moving along and keeping on time. This is a momentous day, and I'm delighted you're with us to share it. So I want to begin with the land acknowledgement of Massey College, that we acknowledge the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat peoples and the treaty lands of the Mississippis of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And acknowledging that land means that Massey College has a responsibility to preserve and to pass it on to generations. So, without much further ado, we'll have some initial welcome remarks and then into our first panel. So I want to welcome the new principal of Massey College. He probably needs very little introduction to this audience, but for those who are watching on our YouTube channel, James Orbinski is not only a renowned medical practitioner and doctor, but also humanitarian. Was chairman of the International Council of Doctors Without Borders when they received the Nobel Prize. And in the audience, we have Peter Raymond, who is an old colleague of mine from Queens, who actually made a film about Dr. Orbinski on the issues about humanitarianism. So he stands not only for good medicine, but for a good international system. James, the podium is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. It is absolutely a pleasure for me to initiate or welcome everyone here today for this inaugural conference that is the first conference where I, as principal, I'm participating. This is truly a seminal moment, a hinge moment in our human story. Today, Donald Trump will be inaugurated as President of the United States. There's absolutely no question that this is a moment of profound change for the world and certainly for Canada. Once Mr. Trump is formally inaugurated as president, he will begin deportations. He will begin the imposition of tariffs on China, on Canada, very likely, and on many other countries. He will pardon some, if not most, of the January 6 protesters. He will withdraw from the Paris Climate Change Accord. He will also withdraw support for the World Health Organization. And he has already threatened to invade Panama, buy or take over Greenland, and to annex Canada. He's also threatened to withdraw from NATO. These are statements that are made not to enemies, but to allies, to friends. So what we're seeing here is a fundamental shift in the dominance of a particular approach, an attitudinal approach to the conduct of international relations. From World War II through to today, we've moved with a confluence of relationship between allies as a framework for thinking about international relations to a rules-based, law-based system for thinking and behaving in terms of international relations. And then the third current has been power. Since 1945, very much a rules-based international order has dominated. And it's in that context that my major focus in my career, humanitarianism, has been able to prosper in so many ways, is certainly not unchallenged, and most significantly today. But today, with the inauguration of Mr. Trump, we're seeing now the emergence of not a rules-based system, of not a allies-based system, but of a system that is predominantly power-based. This is a major, major change. It's a hinge moment in our collective human story. It will, and already is, having global impact. We know, for example, that at the inauguration events today, heads of state, many heads of state, normal allies, normal heads of state of allied nations from the UK, Germany, France, and so on, would normally be present. In fact, they're not invited. But who is invited? It is the far-right opposition leaders of those very countries that are now invited to attend the inauguration, as well as with Mr. Musk, who over the last number of weeks has pilloried sitting heads of state in Europe who are our traditional allies, our G7 allies and our European allies. So this is a huge shift in global affairs. And the other notable point that is worth just recognizing is that Mr. Trump, over the weekend, has launched a new cryptocurrency. And that cryptocurrency is a meme cryptocurrency, but it is already valued, already within hours of its launch, valued at $72 billion US dollars. So this is this confluence, this change in the focus of the state, this change in the nature and structure of relationship internationally. This is that moment of fundamental change. Tad Homer-Dixon this weekend, in a brilliant, I thought, opinion piece in the Globe and Mail, called this moment a moment of aggregated causal force. No matter what, the world has and will continue to be in perpetual and actually unpredictable change. Now, in that context, we are gathered at this with just some of the greatest minds in this country. We're gathered here now to talk about what's next in Canadian-American relations in the age of Trump. I've simply touched on some broad themes and broad issues that will frame, I hope, or at least be part of the frame, that helps us begin to address some of the issues that are very self-evidently on the agenda. I just want to close my opening comments by just noting that the strength of Massey College is in its absolute clarity around its commitment to the public good and its commitment to cultivating civility and leadership for the public good. This is the focus of the college, and I cannot be more delighted, could not be more delighted, pardon me, that we are engaged on this particular issue today. This is the front and center issue that requires the ongoing cultivation of civility and the ongoing cultivation of leadership across many sectors in order to bring Canada into the age of Trump, but as Canadians, not as something that we do not wish to be. Tom Axworthy, John Meehan, thank you, and Peter as well, Peter Slowly, thank you so much for putting this together. And we have wonderful, wonderful panels on national security and foreign policy, on the border, on business relations between Canada and the US and our public policy chair, and also on Canada's response to the Trump challenge. And with that, I look forward to a wonderful day together. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Principal. I should mention that today is the first conference under the new principal, but of course he's been active in Massey. And last time we were together, my brother Lloyd, who is 85, was welcomed at Massey, and James was so kind in taking care of him that the next day he drove him back to Ottawa. So that is a service that we're not going to give to every guest we have in the public policy program, but it was a very nice start. So now, equal pleasure in introducing John Meehan, from the Bill Graham Center of Contemporary History, our partner today, along with the NATO Association, a very distinguished historian who particularly has concentrated on Canada's relations with Asia, also a Jesuit, a theologian, and I was chatting with him and Don Gibson, who co-chairs our ethics program at Massey, that we may want to engage John a lot more on the ethical domain, because I think we're going to have some ethical challenges in the weeks and months ahead. John, delighted you're with us.
We may save the ethical dilemmas for another conference, Tom. Well, it's an honor to be here, a pleasure. John Meehan, director of the Bill Graham Center for Contemporary International History. And as I was chatting with people over coffee, it's nice to see many of you again. And I said to them, enjoy the day, and I realized that's the wrong verb. It's a historical day, a momentous day. James, thanks for your comments. I agree when you describe it as a hinge moment. The Graham Center, as you know, was founded by the late Honorable Bill Graham, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Defense, a man who I was honored to know a little bit before he passed away, a man who is dedicated to global citizenship. And we carry on that tradition at the Graham Center, using historical perspectives to understand where we are and where we're going. I'd like to welcome you all to this gathering. I'd like to thank Massey College, especially its new principal, Dr. James Orbinski, as well as Tom Axworthy, Peter Slowly, for putting all this together, tirelessly, your efforts. Also Robert Baines, my colleague at the NATO Association of Canada, with whom we do a lot of work. I'd like to thank also our keynote speaker today, Amanda Lang. I'm looking forward to your comments, our expert panelists who are gathered here, and all of you for taking the time to be here today. Thank you for your interest and concern in a topic that affects us all. In 3 hours from now, Donald J. Trump will be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States of America. And while many in the American capital and throughout the US are cheering today, many others in America, Canada, and around the world are wondering what this new administration might bring. We got a hint of that in my colleague, Dr. Orbinski's comments. The new president promises to end global conflicts, for which he may expect the Nobel Peace Prize. He promises to bring down inflation domestically. He promises to close borders. But he also has promised the threats of mass deportations of immigrants, unprecedented tariffs affecting even their closest trading partners, such as Canada. All of this under an aggressive stance of America first, and all proclaimed by a leader known for his erratic and unpredictable behavior. How might this change of leadership affect Canada's relations with its closest ally and largest trading partner? Does this mark a break in our post-war economic, political, and military relations with the United States? How might Canada respond to an aggressive America First policy from the new president? And today's conference, entitled What's Next? U.S. Relations in the Age of Trump, seeks to address such questions. Today's Inauguration Day, as I say, it's also Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and it also happens to be Blue Monday, as if... the most depressing day of the year based on the lack of sunlight and where it fits in the calendar. So I hope this won't add to your Blue Monday, but we are gathered here really to explore, to reflect on these new directions, policies, knowing that later today, as Mr. Trump has promised, there'll be something like 100 executive orders emanating out of his office, which he, in his words, will make heads turn. What happens next will affect America, Canada, and the entire world. I can't say that I'm going to enjoy today, but I do look forward to our discussions today and the greater insight that they will provide into possible changes, even momentous ones, that will affect Canada in the days, months, and years to come. So on behalf of the Bill Graham Center, I want to welcome you all and thank you very much. I look forward to our conversations today.
And with little more to do, I want Robert Baines up, the Executive Director, CEO of the NATO Association, a graduate of Trinity, if I recall, and York University, our partner in today. Welcome, and our moderator of the first panel. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here and to help host our first panel. Obviously, national security is a big issue that we're having to face here today, and probably hearing some executive orders regarding that today. I did want to thank James, John, and Tom for hosting this and to collaborate with the NATO Association of Canada. As Tom was mentioning, I am the CEO of the NATO Association. Our goal is to inform Canadians about the value of security more generally, but the importance of NATO specifically as one of the main supports of Canada's face on the international scene. Clearly, Mr. Trump has some opinions on that and Canada's role in NATO. We'll get to that in a bit, but I did want to focus a little bit on the hinginess of today. Very rarely in the past 30 years have we had a kind of inauguration like this. We have Mr. Trump, who has now found his metre. He understands, he thinks, the presidency, what he can do with it. He now has this whole slew of executive orders ready to drop. He's comfortable and willing to take charge. I'm not the only one, I think, who has certain concerns about what's going to happen today, and we'll talk about the many issues that kind of spread from this situation and Mr. Trump's taking over of the reins yet again. But I'm thrilled that we've got Rosemary McCarney here. We've got Suella Chronopoulos and Jack Cunningham, all three very diverse experiences when it comes to national security and foreign policy. So I'm really thrilled that we'll be able to dig into some of the most important issues that today is going to impact. But I'd like to take us back a little bit about the relationship. All of us know the United States well. I'm sure every person here has enjoyed being in the United States, have many friends there. I'd say that that was the case for most Canadians. It is an indispensable relationship for us. It is something that has been more of a friendship than a partnership. And that is the real hinge that I think affects Canada today. It is the fact that Mr. Trump sees this as something that's much more transactional. The non-zero sum versus the zero sum. That is the main effort of the post-World War II order that James was talking about so eloquently, is the idea that many people can put a little bit into the rules-based international order and get a lot more out of it. That we can all depend on justice being essentially the result of legislated laws and agreements instead of through power alone. And that's a remarkable thing that we've achieved. And it is remarkable that a hegemon like the United States has been behind that for so long. Well, perhaps no more. I think we can all agree on that. We've got a historic, what shall we say, meme, essentially, that we all hang on to, that the United States and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world, and in history as well. Don't forget that. This is not a normal thing that we enjoy. This pocket of history, this kind of warm, cozy nook of human experience is not normal. And the fact that we have something that is so long and so undefended, which of course is coming up today, is something that should be celebrated more and should be the way that we see a friendship in the truest sense. Thinking back to 1812, the one comment that we usually bring up when it comes to burning the White House and how much we made them pay for trying to step over the line and take over Canada. It's something that we never forget and we always return to. But I think we have to go a lot deeper than this. The relationship between the United States and Canada in World War II and helping to set up all of the international institutions was just so pivotal. The fact that we had a major role in setting up NATO, the UN, of course, the whole architecture of Bretton Woods, the International Criminal Court, all of these essential institutions. These are something worth fighting for, and as John was mentioning, we have to do it with grace and polish, but also with strength. We have to make sure that people see the value of these institutions. They're not just something that's nice to have. It's the only way that Canada is going to be able to have a foothold in the world, to be able to push forward, to be able to make sure that we can have our say, and to make sure that we live in a just world, the kind of world that we've been dreaming of, and perhaps will never exist, but we're always pushing towards it. And I really do think that Canadians need to take a harsh, in the bright light of day, a look at what our country needs to do internationally. I'm not only thinking of NATO's demand for 2% GDP spent on defense, but many other essentially burdens that we should be holding up. I couldn't not talk about NAFTA and the free trade that we get, the kinds of resource sharing that allows us as well, people and resources, and we'll be speaking a little bit about that on our second panelist. But it's so important for us to realize that this is a friendship, not just a partnership. Mr. Trump sees it as just a partnership, a business partnership, and we have to keep our eyes wide on that point. So zero sum is what we're going to have to deal with, but I think we can do that with grace. So without further ado, I would like to invite Rosemary McCarney to the podium to talk a little bit about what she would suggest our future Prime Minister essentially mark as a political speech on foreign policy to the United States and to the new president. Rosemary, please.
Well, thanks very much to Tom and John and Robert and of course James. Welcome. And thank you for hosting us in this very special space, which you're still discovering and which all of us can discover today. The last Trump administration, as well as the musings since the re-election of Donald Trump, there's been full of drama and color, without question, both from him, but also from our own Canadian leaders and potential leaders. So, I checked in with Tom and I said, we can talk about the Canada-US relationship in a lot of ways, but how about if I do it like a speech? And the speech I'm thinking about is the speech that I would hope that the new Prime Minister of Canada might deliver on US-Canada relations to the new incoming President of the United States. So if you bear with me and kind of think of yourselves as an audience of the joint House of Senate and Republicans with President Trump, this is the speech I would hope we might be able to deliver. So, bit of suspended belief here. President Trump and members of the Senate and Congress, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to stand here as the new Prime Minister of Canada, addressing our historically close partner and neighbor, the United States of America. The bond between our two nations is unique, grounded in a shared continental geography, intertwined economies, healthy competition, mutual security, and the enduring ties of family and friendship that span our border. Still, the longest peaceful, but not necessarily so undefended, border in the world. As U.S. President Trump described U.S. President Truman described the relationship on his first visit to the Canadian Parliament about 80 years ago. This deep relationship is determined by only one part, geographic proximity, and by 9 parts, goodwill and common sense. And that is still true today. The relationship between Canada and the United States has weathered challenges and celebrated triumphs over centuries. Today, I'm here to reaffirm Canada's commitments to strengthening the vital relationship that continues to serve both our sovereign nations and the world, while acknowledging that our two great countries have and may continue to have and continue to pursue different pathways in response to the world's new and emerging challenges, which are largely global, interconnected, and borderless. There are many things to talk about today, Mr. President, but here are some things that are on my mind, 6 things that are on my mind as I begin my new mandate and you yours. The usual place to start a discussion on Canada-US relations is our economic partnership in North America. That's not the one. There we go. Mr. President, what can one say that has not been said many times? The codependence of the economic relationship between Canada and the United States is extraordinary. You know the facts, but one fact says it all. Each day, our two-way trade exceeds $3.5 billion every day, supporting tens of millions of American jobs. To paraphrase an old Canada-US metaphor, when Canada sneezes, American workers get a cold. Our businesses innovate together, our supply chains are deeply integrated, and our workers thrive because of the opportunities this stable relationship it creates. Very recently, we worked through complex negotiations to modernize our trade arrangements. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, or CUSMA from my side of the border. It reflects our shared commitment to a fair and equitable trade framework that benefits all our citizens. Canada honors our existing treaties and agreements with all signatories, and also stands ready not to endlessly renegotiate them, but also to move forward, exploring new opportunities for cooperation in areas like clean energy, critical minerals, and advanced technologies, where our immediate futures lie. We recognize the importance of addressing the inevitable trade irritants that emerge in such a complex, massive trade relationship in a spirit of respect and sometimes tough negotiations. Our economies succeed when we resolve disputes constructively, avoiding threats, tariffs, sanctions, and barriers that disrupt growth and prosperity and cause needless and avoidable damage to our citizens and especially our workers. On shared defense and security, Canada and the United States have stood shoulder to shoulder in defense of freedom and democracy for decades in Europe, the Pacific, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and many other conflict zones. From NATO missions to NORAD, the cornerstone of our shared continental defense, our countries have demonstrated unwavering commitment to ensuring the safety and security of both our citizens. As threats evolve, modernization of our shared security infrastructure is required. Canada is fully committed to working with the United States on NORAD modernization, ensuring our defensive capabilities are prepared to defend emerging challenges such as cyber threats and emerging challenges such as missile defense, as well as new threats in our shared Arctic waters as ice gives way to increase access to Canada's Northwest Passage and the strategic gateway it could provide. Furthermore, Canada remains a steadfast ally in the global fight against terrorist acts and authoritarianism. We will continue to stand alongside our NATO allies in promoting peace, stability, and human rights around the world because, Mr. President, there is no peace and stability without human rights and accountability and justice for those friends and foes who abuse the fundamental rights of others. On stewardship of our climate, our shared climate and the environment that knows no borders. Mr. President, some things know no borders. The environment, pandemics, smoke from raging fires, and this week's Arctic vortex. While our approaches to the threats of climate change may differ, we are committed to moving quickly to a just transition away from a fossil fuel economy. Canada is working to work with the US on practical solutions that balance economic growth with environmental sustainability. We do not regard climate action and economic prosperity as a zero-sum game. Whether through advancing clean energy innovation, protecting cross-border water systems, or coordinating Arctic stewardship, I see opportunity aligning our efforts. Our commitment to protecting Canadians now and in the future from environmental degradation and biodiversity losses is steadfast, Mr. President. Canada possesses an abundance of natural resources from the Great Lakes to the Arctic. We believe together we can model a North American Earth-first set of actions that will ensure our shared prosperity and protect future generations from the harm of an overheated climate. The Arctic. Mr. President, the Arctic represents a place of immense strategic, environmental, and economic significance. It is first and foremost, however, home for Indigenous people who have occupied the Arctic for millennia. Canada will defend its vast Arctic land and waters through new investments and deep partnerships with Indigenous stewards of our northern sovereign territory. As Arctic ice continues to recede, new opportunities and challenges arise. Canada and the United States and our allies have a shared responsibility to ensure this region remains a zone of peace and careful development. We are clear-eyed about the military significance of our Arctic. Russia is, after all, Canada's closest northern neighbor, with whom we share a very long border as well. Together, we can prioritize responsible resource management, enhance scientific research, as well as robust security cooperation to protect this fragile environment. After 25 years, the Arctic Council remains a critical multi-state institution addressing the rapidly changing Arctic. It must also, through cooperation and joint action, remain fit for purpose. Canada looks forward to working with the United States and the Arctic states and the Arctic Council in advancing Arctic stewardship and ensuring that Indigenous communities are key partners who benefit from smart, sustainable Arctic policies. President Trump, the COVID-19 pandemic underscored the critical importance of global health security and the borderless essence of deadly pathogens. Canada and the United States must again work together to strengthen our preparedness and response to future health crises. Our health experts tell me that we are most certainly not now ready. We need to collaborate in vaccine research, anticipating the norms and border rules in the next pandemic, and support multilateral efforts through critical organizations like the World Health Organization, Gavi, and the Global Fund. By investing in these multilateral institutions working on the front lines and ensuring next time equitable access to medical resources like vaccines, therapeutics, and research and development across the world, our nations can lead the charge in protecting global health and minimizing the human and financial carnage wreaked by COVID-19. This is not the time to withdraw, but to lean into these essential institutions. Effective multilateralism is the best health insurance we have against global health threats. But multilateralism is under attack, Mr. President. As powerful democracies, Canada and the United States are most at risk of the damage being done to the rules-based international order by friends and foes. From promoting democracy to addressing health crises, climate degradation, trade and development, and the rule of law, our nations are stronger when the world works together in the global institutions that Americans and Canadians have created. Canadians believe that imperfect institutions can be improved, not by quitting them, but by staying inside and onside to avoid the creation of dangerous power vacuums. Canada is ready to work with the US in strengthening the key multilateral institutions, such as the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the Human Rights Council, the International Courts, and the Conference on Disarmament, and others, while disarming those who seek to undermine those institutions, which are essential to addressing the challenges like biological threats, disarmament inaction, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the unchecked impunity, and upholding the rules-based international order. Together, we can counter those determined to destroy the international order. We've heard you talk in recent weeks about the border. Spanning over 8,800 kilometers, our Canada-US border is the longest international border in the world. It is not, sorry, I'm not doing this correctly. There we go, somewhere around there. The longest border, our Canada-US border, is the longest international border in the world. It has not changed in length for over about 200 years, but it has thinned and thickened at various times, reacting to diseases, security issues, concerns, and most recently, trade decisions. It is much more than just a dividing line defining our sovereign territories. It is a meaningful testament to our shared histories and our two great and different systems of government and democratic traditions. Borders are a two-way street. Canada is committed to working with the United States to enhance the security and the efficiency of the border, from advancing smart border technology to ensuring the smooth flow of authorized goods and people that cross the international border in both directions every day. We need to build these contemporary policies as we have in the past, on facts, not conjecture. Borders, we know, require trust as well as operational efficiency. Finally, President Trump, the bond between Canada and the United States is not simply a matter of geography and economics. It is rooted in shared history, mutual respect, and a vision for a future that benefits all our citizens. We North Americans cannot retreat from the world. We need the vision, the wisdom, the passion of the builders of the last century who looked on the scourge of wars, tyrants, and authoritarians and resolved to do better. Platitudes, rhetoric, slogans, and mixed metaphors are not enough to ensure that we too will do better. As Prime Minister, I am committed to building on this deep history, finding common ground, and addressing our challenges with pragmatism and resolve. It is easy to embrace fear and anger, but we will do the hard work of finding common ground wherever possible. The people of Canada expect that of me. Together, in our new roles, you and I have the opportunity to work on the real things that matter and build legacies that endure. Thank you. At that point, you can cue the Maple Leaf Forever.
Thank you so much, I realize I neglected to introduce you properly. Of course, our former ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva and to the Conference on Disarmament, also the former CEO of Plan Canada International, and the executive director of the Canada-US Law Society as well. And of course, that gives you so much ability to talk on many different issues. And thank you so much for that little conceit. That was a delightful and important policy suggestion there. So we'll
There might be some candidates who want to sign her up.
Indeed. But now we'll move a little bit more onto some of the resources that we share with the United States of America. Sola, an absolute pleasure to have you here. Sola Chronopoulos is CEO of Aqua Action. For 20 years, she has been an important leader in tech and in various other different industries, but also has started out researching Alzheimer's disease, which of course has everything to do with memory. And hopefully the United States keeps our memory strong and its citizens are able to see our way through to a great relationship. Sola.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning. Tom, thank you for the kind invitation. Thank you to Massey College and the Graham Institute. It's really lovely to be here with everybody, Robert and Rosemary, etc. I really want to start with a story. So I want to show you a picture. These are my olive trees in Greece. I come from a long line of olive farmers, hundreds and hundreds of years. I actually don't know how old my olive trees are. I've got over 1,200 of them. We produce about 35 tons of olives a year, extra virgin olive oil. That's beautiful, comes out in November. And about 5 to 7 tons of actual olive oil comes from those trees. The oldest tree is about 3,000 years old. That's what we know. I don't know how old my trees are because before the 1800s, kind of got lost to the Ottoman occupation. So our history's gone, but I know that they're at least, some of them are at least 500 to 600 years old. This year, the first year that we harvested olives, where I couldn't harvest half my trees. We haven't had water since March 29 of 2024. So when we harvested on November the 28th of this year, half of them had gone dry. And these are the olive trees in front of my grandfather's house where I used to play. And I have nightmares that I'm going to be the last in the line of olive farmers. So aside from being the president of Aqua Action, this is personal to me. And I wanted to bring it home to everybody because you can say, why water? You know, because water runs through every single thing we do. So I just wanted to maybe kind of just show you a few pictures. This is the tip of where my olives are. It's actually one of the oldest castles in Europe. So you'll see right behind here is where my olive trees lie, surrounded by water. But only 1% of that water is potable. And I don't know that we realize that as in humanity. This is my family. Those are my beautiful olives. That's my olive oil. And this is what they looked like this year. So it's very personal to me. And I'm here today to discuss a couple of things that I think are important for all of us. First and foremost, this reflects a much larger crisis, which is the water crisis. We can live a month without food, some say even a year, but we can only live 3 days without water. And the economic impact is really devastating. Last year in February of 2024, the World Wildlife Fund actually quantified the impact of water. And fresh water runs 60% of our global GDP, a value of about $58 trillion. So let's think about that for a second. That's huge. So imagine that we don't have water, we're facing scarcity, we're facing drought, and yet our economy and our very existence thrives on this. More importantly, it's a public health issue too. Our water's not clean. You know, we all wake up and we've all heard about the forever chemicals. They've been around since 30, 40 years, where we wanted to make sure that we don't get stains on our couches and our eggs don't stick. Well, that has had a very devastating impact. 100% of us have PFAS in our systems, 100%. What does PFAS do? PFAS causes things like miscarriages, hypertension, cancer. They all sound familiar, right? Do we know? Has anybody done the studies? Not yet. But we know that there's a lot of correlations between that. And we see the effects, basically, of this impact. If I'm just going to go to my next slide. You're right, Joe, it does stick. Let me just try to move it forward. Maybe, Joe, we can just get it to the next slide. Nope, too fast, too far. There we go. So why is water so important? And I wanted to focus on this today because I think that we don't understand. There's so many other things, Sula, that we should be tackling. But I just wanted to show you how it affects our national security. And water should be a national security asset. And you'll say, well, you know, gold is and oil is, and some people say we should treat it likewise and just trade it. But we don't drink oil and we don't eat gold. We actually thrive on water. And if you look at where water impacts, food and agriculture, we see those impacts right now in Alberta, right? Alberta's drying up. If I actually give you a stat on the West Coast, the food basket of the world, we lose 1 farm a day, and at least a suicide every day is the average. So food is becoming a big issue. It's the lack of water and the drought that we're seeing impacts our food. That's why our food's getting more expensive, because it costs more to produce that strawberry, right? Industrial operations. Think about, I'll just go into energy and industrial operations. This last year was the first year that every hydro company across Canada had less revenue because we have less water. When we have less water, we have less energy. So water impacts energy. Water impacts residential demand. We can't build houses in Alberta. We actually have to import water into Alberta because we have depleted all the groundwater. And if you look at Mexico, Mexico is hitting what we call day zero. They don't have any more water. So we're not managing our water well. It's also a public health issue. If we're not healthy, how can we actually secure our nation? How can we actually fight back and actually take a lead? And if you look at the environment, as Rosemary said, degradation and all those things are having immense impacts on our military, on our defense systems, et cetera. And finally, cybersecurity. Our water systems, I don't know if you know how water is treated. We have intake, and then we have water that's released back into our waters. Those intake systems, if you've ever visited a treatment station, you're going to see how vulnerable it is, how easy it is for a bad actor to actually infect and hurt us all, right? Nobody's done it yet. But when we talk about water as a national security asset, we're talking about protecting us, not protecting just the quality of that water and the amount of that water, but also protecting us from terrorist attacks. So I just wanted to put that out there. And if we look at how much water has impacted, right, every 1% increase in the climate, our temperature, causes 7% more steam in the air, which is why we're seeing more violent impacts and catastrophes such as floods and fires. So last year alone was a record and record-breaking year for Canada. $8.5 billion alone in insured losses last year. $7 billion of that was just Jasper. In the US, the billion-dollar disasters have been averaging $140 billion annually, but just the LA fires so far are estimated to reach about $275 billion. And globally, I just changed my numbers, Robert. I read another report last night. Over $540 billion it's cost so far and growing. So water is at the core of everything we're talking about. Just going to go to my next slide. There we go. All right. So if we look at our US-Canada relations, what does MAGA mean? Make America Great. Mr. Trump is referring to energy, agriculture, manufacturing. And what's at the core of that? Water. So there have been many attempts since the 1950s with the Army Corps to basically try to harness that water and rejuvenate, I guess, the Colorado River, which is because the Southwest is drying up. But when he's talking about that, he's really saying, we want your water. So while we sit and we talk about a lot of things, we have to pay attention to what's in our best interest as humans. We live 3 days without it. It's impacting everything you saw in my previous slide. We need to treat it as a national security issue. So the US did this. Last February, they actually raised water and water scarcity for the first time ever to a global threat. And that has unleashed a lot of things. And we work on both sides of the border, so I can tell you what is done in the United States. The EPA and CISA have issued updated guidance for safeguarding critical water infrastructure, number one. Number two, they propose cybersecurity bills aimed at reducing water risk and resilience. These efforts aim to protect water systems from disruption, data loss, and information theft. They've created a water resilience roadmap. The EPA, in collaboration with other agencies, released a 2024 roadmap to secure and resilient water and wastewater sector. And it outlines priority activity and actions to improve resilience. There's more international collaborations. They've actually done a lot of outreach and engage in international dialogues to protect water. The State Department is establishing an intergovernmental dialogue to form international conversations. This initiative aims to foster more of these global interactions and collaborations. The EPA Office of the Inspector General highlighted the cybersecurity weaknesses of the nation's drinking water systems. We have to do the same. We have to do the same. So the US, our biggest ally, is doing this, and now in the time of Trump, we know what's going to happen. So we're all waiting for it. I'm just going to show you another little slide. Yep. I'm just going to go back one. There is hope. If I can just get to my little slide, Joe, can you help me out here? There, no. There, okay.
It's time to get to hope.
Okay, we got to hope. So I want to tell you a little bit about AquaAction. In 2015, the family behind AquaAction, which is a North American charity, thought that water was going to be the fight of our future. They saw it coming. This is the Fondation de Gaspé-Beaubien. So they started a lot of the media in Canada. They started the first cell phone company. And they decided in 2015, water's going to be a problem. And we're saying, well, water-rich nation like Canada, how can we have a problem? Well, we do. Because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. We have the most water in the world, and we have this false sense of security. And we need to protect this like a national asset. So in terms of where hope comes in, water technologies specifically must be protected. And let me just tell you some stories. The first one, Permolution, that you see here is a water technology that all these come out of Canada. They were born in Canada. The first one is harnessing the atmospheric rivers and creating new water. This is gold in Alberta. They're also being courted very heavily by the United States. So they're actually down in the US now, around the Great Lakes, doing fire prevention, so wildfire prevention. A Canadian company. Second Canadian company, Lee Dana. He's growing farms in the sand. He's figured out how to use aquaculture in a closed-loop system to grow farms in the sand. Again, imagine what that will do to our food security. The third one, BioAlert, is already in the Department of Defense in the US. They're actually detecting Legionella. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's amazing what the future looks like. But do you know what artificial intelligence comes from? It comes from these farms, and farms are not in the cloud. Farms are actually cloud computer farms that sit in deserts, sit in different areas, and we need to cool them. How do we cool them? With that 1% of water that we have to drink. So as we increase AI, there's an impact on our water that we have to heed. So he works in the Department of Defense to basically protect that water from Legionella. Then we have water pearls. Water pearls is an organic pearl that sits on farmland and actually reduces the amount of water required and creates a 30% more food output. He is actually cleaning up Jasper right now. So when we talk about disasters and the $1 billion of costs, we don't necessarily talk about the aftermath. It's not sexy. But right now, Jasper is very dirty. The stormwater systems are actually very polluted. We have to restore them. So with some of these technologies, we're placing them with Parks Canada in the park, and by December, we'll have cleaned all those stormwaters from all that soot that's sitting in that water. Other examples, Biocene, this is my favorite one. Young group of chemists coming out of McGill, they've decided that they're going to figure out how to turn algae into something good. Algae is killing our waters. It's basically suffocating, taking out all the oxygen. They're taking algae and they're turning it right now into biogas and precious metals. This is what we need to protect. This is the future. And in the time of Trump, what I can tell you seems to be happening, which is really heartening to me, is that everybody suddenly is creating almost a resistance. I think humanity is at its best when we're up against a wall. And we are now, we call it unhinging, we call it a corner, we call it all kinds of things, but we are up against a wall. And the future is all about protecting our national security asset, which is water. So at the end of the day, I think I'm going to make sure I can just wrap up and give you time. But at the end of the day, what I wanted to say is that let's not be distracted by the politics of culture, by the politics of drama and all the things we're seeing. Watch what they're doing, not what they're saying. And please don't let me be the last in the line of olive farmers. Our future security depends on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sola. That was excellent. I'm sure we'll talk about what that means for our cross-border discussions in just a moment. But before that, Jack Cunningham has been a great supporter of NATO, discussions of history, discussions of all sorts of national security. Having done his PhD here at U of T, he is now the coordinator for the Bill Graham Center at Trinity College, somebody who's very thoughtful, always thinking about how history is affecting us today. And Jack, why don't you take us through some of your concerns? And
Well, thank you, Robert. Robert did not mention that I'm also a former junior fellow at Massey College. I spent 3 wonderful years here, enjoyed the sense of community, came away with a lot of wonderful memories. Okay, there were a couple of love affairs that ended badly, but that could have happened anywhere. But it's a delight to be here nonetheless. And thank you to all the organizers, all the sponsors. We are beneficiaries of a post-1945 international order that has brought us relative security, peace, prosperity, and in times of stability, we tend to forget something important about it. It has always fundamentally rested on, been underpinned by, been maintained, and even enforced by power. The power of the United States and its allies. The United States has borne disproportionate burdens. Every president from Truman through Obama complained at some point about those disproportionate burdens and about the low defense spending of American allies. But they were all fundamentally willing to accept that because they understood that this international order generated not just public benefits for us all, but benefits for the United States that offset those disproportionate burdens. To some extent, disproportionate burdens are the price of hegemony. Disproportionate burdens bring disproportionate power and influence. But Donald Trump is very different. He does not accept that bargain. He sees everything, as we've said before, in zero-sum terms, in transactional terms. Because of our dependence on U.S. military power, most of the other Western nations have not had to bear military burdens they would otherwise have had to bear. This isn't just a question of how much we spend on defense, but how we spend it, how effectively we spend it, where we spend it. Particularly since the end of the Cold War, all of the Western nations with substantial military capabilities have produced modest, limited militaries, maintain modest, limited militaries, because they assumed that they would be operating in supporting roles in coalitions led and dominated by the United States. As a result, they have left the United States with near monopolies in core capabilities, in, if you'll pardon the jargon, strategic enablers, particularly intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, heavily dependent on space-based assets. Space-based assets are crucial to all contemporary conflict. Long-range precision striking power, integrated air and missile defense, air-to-air refueling, strategic lift capacity. And as a result, militarily, America's allies have limited capacity for autonomous action. And that's something we should probably address going forward, because we cannot rely as much on the United States as we used to. I recently saw a very good report published by something called the Alphen Group. It's a group of defense intellectuals for most of the NATO countries. Now, the focus was largely on Europe, and it talked about beefing up the military capabilities of the European NATO members, but there was some attention to Canada in particular, and the authors of the report did note that we have extensive land mass, much of it very thinly populated. So we've got a lot of territory to defend. We have 3 oceans on which we border, and we're not spending a lot. And moreover, what we do spend is not spent efficiently. We're all familiar with the NATO 2% GDP benchmark. There's another commitment to NATO we've undertaken. Spend 20% of our defense budget on equipment purchases, including R&D. Canada is the only NATO member that is currently meeting neither benchmark. So we have a problem. We have a lot of lost ground to retake. If we and as that report said, we have territory to defend. We have the Arctic. We have continental defense to consider. We also have the North Atlantic. We often think of continental defense and Arctic defense as quite separate from our commitment to Europe. I see them as distinct but somewhat overlapping and somewhat linked theaters in what is largely a common geopolitical struggle. Vladimir Putin is pursuing his interests in Europe. He's also very much interested in the Arctic. So our defense capabilities should be beefed up so as to do more for continental defense, more for defending the Arctic, some commitment to providing security in the North Atlantic, and a capacity to reinforce the Europeans as required. And that will require substantial expenditures, acquiring particular capabilities. We need an autonomous, independent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capability. We need passive sensors to detect Russian or even Chinese vessels making incursions into the Arctic waters. And when that happens, we need up-to-date submarines to respond, because a diplomatic note has limited utility. And it won't do to simply send a Mountie on an Eskimo, on a Skidoo. So there's a lot to do there. This requires substantial expenditure. It also requires changes in the way we allocate responsibilities. We need to shift more responsibilities into NORAD, which is a binational command, the only one of its kind anywhere on Earth. Its mandate, traditionally limited to air warning, has been extended since 9/11. There's a maritime dimension. There's, of course, ballistic missile defense, which we need to revisit, because if we don't get ballistic missile defense under the NORAD umbrella, it will fall entirely within NORTHCOM, a purely U.S. command. and we will not have a seat at the table. Now, for a long time, Canadians have thought, well, because of geographic proximity, the Americans have to defend us. Well, to some extent, yes, but to the extent that they do, to the extent that they are providing the defense, that defense will be on American terms. And under Donald Trump, we can expect those terms not to be particularly congenial. One of the characteristics of the first Trump administration was that defense was linked to other issues. I recently had a guest speaker in my seminar on Canadian defense policy who had talked to people who'd been present during the first Trump administration at meetings between the then Canadian Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, and his U.S. counterpart, Stephen Mnuchin. These were ostensibly to talk about trade, but every time they met, Mnuchin would open the conversation by saying, "What about your lousy defense spending?" So the Trump administration is going to link defense to other issues, use it as leverage to gain concessions we will find pretty uncongenial. Sovereignty, if I can adapt a phrase from Mao Zedong, comes out of the barrel of a gun. And if you don't have military capabilities of your own and are dependent upon the military largesse of another power, you have compromised a great deal. I'm, among other things, a student of ancient Greek history. And I remember how what was once called the Delian League, an alliance of Athens and its enemies, became eventually an empire, the Athenian Empire. That was symbolized when the treasury was moved from Delos to Athens. But what was important was that before then, everybody except the Athenians was only contributing money. The Athenians had all the ships, all the naval capacity, in an age when sea power was determinative. We don't want to end up in a situation like this. Our national leadership has not, I fear, been up to the challenge. And it really comes down to the difference between self-regard and self-respect. Donald Trump, to put it mildly, is a monster of self-regard. He personifies malignant narcissism. But, and I do not offer this in a partisan spirit, in a much milder, less threatening form, so does our feckless Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, characterized by a sense of entitlement, an insistence that everything that happens in Ottawa be about him. Self-respect differs from self-regard because it is about a set of standards of conduct to which you hold yourself, and to which, if you do not hold yourself, you cannot live with yourself. We need a national leadership with a good deal less self-regard and a good deal more self-respect, and that is willing to tell the electorate the unpalatable truth, that it must shoulder the burdens of a greater degree of responsibility in order to maintain sovereignty, or risk becoming a geopolitical castrato. I should point out, this isn't entirely a Trump-related phenomenon. There are survey data indicating that not only among the American public as a whole, but among the leadership of both political parties, there are strong forces pressing for an America less engaged with the world abroad, less committed to the security of others, less committed to maintaining the liberal international order I spoke of. Now, that's not as pronounced everywhere as it is with Mr. Trump and his circle, but it does mean that increasingly American engagement abroad will be conditional. We're likely to see much more of American dealings with even an ally as close as Canada have a substantial element of the transactional in them. Not, to be sure, on quite as pathological terms as those we can expect from Mr. Trump, but that's probably a long-term trend to which we need to accommodate ourselves. And if we don't mind to our own defense capabilities, our own ability to protect our territory, contribute to the defense of our allies, we will find ourselves increasingly irrelevant. The post-war international order was, to be sure, in part a Canadian construct. I think the first public articulation of the need for NATO was by the diplomat Scott Reed at the Kuchiching Conference in 1947. And one of our greatest statesmen, Lester Pearson, was one of the architects of NATO. But Pearson also said, the thing you have to remember about the Americans is that they are instinctively isolationist. Now, there's always an element of mythology to that. The isolationism was never total, and it incidentally went with an assertion of often overbearing hegemony in the immediate neighborhood, but it's there. I always tell my students when they lament the inconsistencies, the hypocrisies, the excesses of American hegemony, you'll miss it when it's gone. And that is also part of the future we have to contemplate. I wish I could end on a somewhat more comforting note, but that's what I've got to offer, and I hope we can discuss some of the particulars as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack, and what great turn of phrase. Just going to have a...
Well, I had to live up to that big selling job you did.
Indeed. We're just going to have a few questions amongst the panel and then open it up so that you can get your questions as quickly as possible. We will have a roving mic. But first, I just wanted to get us going. I noticed Kathy Graham step into the room. I did want to mention that. And her dear husband, Bill, was such a supporter of so many important aspects of Canadian foreign policy and security. If you read in his book, Call of the World, he mentions the challenges of dealing with the United States during their demand that we join them in attacking Iraq. In the coalition of the willing, and how difficult it was to sidestep and to make deals and to still stay on side. During the first Trump term, there were quite a few attempts to do this, working with the various governors and other actors to try to get Canada's agenda on the US agenda. I just wondered, from both the resource point of view, the international rules-based order point of view, and the defense point of view, what were some of the greatest successes that we had, if you can think of any, from the first Trump administration that we might be able to use to leverage? Do we have any good points of leverage at the moment that we can bring to the table? Rosemary, anything come to mind?
On this go-around, apologies, this is, on this go-around, I mean, we have a lot of assets. There's no question, we have a lot of assets. And I think really at the moment, probably what's going on in the hallways in Ottawa and in the provincial capitals is figuring out which ones to pull on and in what sequence and how far do you want to go. So for example, one of the Liberal leadership candidates is saying we need to do dollar for dollar. Another candidate or premier is saying, you know, a different approach in terms of not a dollar for dollar one-on-one, but rather kind of a finessing across a range of assets, whether we're talking about oil or critical minerals, et cetera. There's a lot of assets, but as I said, is that it comes with a lot of damage. It comes with a lot of damage to us. It comes with a lot of damage to them. And so, you know, when you go at it with a power like the United States, that might see it on a less factual basis, maybe a more emotive basis, et cetera, or from that hard power. I mean, we're back into hard power dynamics without question. I think it's difficult to figure out where you play those cards and in what order and how fast. And some are arguing today in Ottawa, you've got to do it fast and hard. So it's a wake-up call. And others are saying, no, we need to stage it, and we need to stage it carefully so that we're not playing their game. We're playing our game, which is both an offensive and a defensive strategy.
Jack, it looks like you want to reply as well.
Well, I'm reminded of what I think is one of the great successes of a government of which I have often been very critical, and that was the negotiation of NAFTA 2.0. And there we took advantage of the fact that constitutionally, the American presidency is a pretty weak office, except in foreign affairs, foreign policy and defense. So there are most measures are enacted through legislation that has to make its way through Congress. And if you can successfully manage to communicate what you want, find agreement, common ground at those other choke points with those other actors, you have a good chance of success, and that's what we did. We lobbied senators and representatives from states with a lot of investment in cross-border trade, governors of such states, business groups, even a few labor groups, NGOs, and as a result, we're able to generate enough political pressure that we ended up with a deal that, while imperfect, was not as damaging as it might otherwise have been. We're probably wise to do some of the same. I would caution against expending a lot of time and energy trying to figure out exactly what Trump wants, what Trump means. To some extent, chaos and uncertainty are part of his modus operandi. If he's got everybody speculating about what he really wants, whether this 3 a.m. tweet is just a 3 a.m. tweet, whether it's a bargaining position from which he will retreat in hard negotiations, whether it represents some combination of the two, well, we just leave him able to exploit the uncertainty, to be in a position of psychological dominance, to use leverage when and where he chooses, to suck up all the oxygen in the room. Instead, look at what he does, not what he says, and respond accordingly. In some cases, that may mean dollar for dollar. In some cases, a more calibrated reproach. But don't get too distracted by the rhetoric, and don't get too distracted by him.
Right. I did want to move on to
Sure.
just if you have any points on that. Otherwise, we can. Sure.
No,
go ahead.
absolutely. I agree. And I think if you look at Kuzma, it was actually a better deal for us because we did negotiate on power, right? Think about our energy. You know, they're threatening us on energy, but the reality is that we're their second largest oil supplier. They take that oil and then we buy it back. So they're very aware that tariffs on our oil is going to bounce back on them as well as us. So I think it's just negotiating from a place of power. And Kuzma is very, very strong, but now he's making noises about renegotiating. And so I think we should never forget that we have a lot of power as Canada, which was what makes us very good partner to them.
Do we have any questions from the floor? We've got one here, two. So we'll just start here in the front and then to Monty.
Thank you for this talk. Oh, wow, I don't have that on my body. So this is about NATO and defense. I'm glad you brought up the Arctic very specifically. We've completely abdicated our responsibility on that, maybe to the point where it's too late. But I'm wondering what role NATO would have in terms of sort of like the new face of conflict and the new face of, I guess foreign interference is a mild word for it, where we see hyphenated communities in Canada being specifically targeted by foreign states, sometimes, as we saw recently, in outright assassinations and violence, but in other ways, more fear-based measures like we have with these sort of secret police stations popping up across North America. Does NATO even have the capabilities or the mandate to deal with that sort of thing, or is this something that we need sort of a new international consensus and a new international organization, is that the word for it, to deal with these emerging threats against also, marginalized communities here. I'm not under threat, really, and most of the people in this room aren't either.
Maybe we'll take Monty as well, and then we'll answer those two first. Oh yes, please do introduce yourself as well.
Monty McMurchie. Compelling arguments. Allow me to say two things. We need to think about our political metrics Canadian, apolitical, not conservative, not liberal, not NDP, Canadian, particularly in defense and foreign affairs and dealing with water. And I think James will support me on this. 90% of conflict in Africa can be attributed to the lack of water. Sudan right now being the prime exemplar. And the future, we need to stand strong, we need to stand together. And to Jack Cunningham, your excursus was absolutely spot on and needs to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. All right, any other questions? Just please do put your hand up. I'll just quickly respond regarding NATO, just from my own point of view. Maybe Jack and Rosemary, you may have some points as well. But because it is an interior aspect, Canada's sovereignty comes into play. NATO's always had a very interesting balancing job to do on personal sovereignty. It itself is an act of pooled sovereignty and pooled security, of course. So when it comes to disinformation, it is a challenging needle to thread, essentially. What we're trying to do is work with resilience. NATO does have a resilience plan which deals with civil society, which I suspect that leg would be under mainly, and an attempt to fight disinformation and meddling. But I'm sure that there are a lot of different bodies that are being birthed at NATO at the moment to deal with more disinformation of that nature, especially the police stations. That would definitely be a national responsibility, but I have no doubt NATO has so many different extra organs, as it were, always new committees, new ways of working, new policies that pop up to respond to all of these issues. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something in the next communique on that, but I'd be happy to follow on. Yeah, John, go ahead. Oh, you've got a question. Perfect.
Thank you. Yes, John Meehan, Bill Graham Center, as you know. I want to pick up on Jack's point about American isolationism, because it's been such a historical trend. We've all heard the comments, President Trump's promises about ending war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Now it's going to be 100 days or whatever. Taiwan, we've all heard his remarks, his 3M tweets about Greenland, Panama, and Canada. And I totally agree, we can't jump at every 3M tweet. But implicit in all this, is there a type of isolationism that amounts to a regionalism, a reassertion of something like the Monroe Doctrine, in which case the United States exercises its sphere of influence in this hemisphere, which allows Putin to do the same in his and Xi Jinping in his? If that's so, and I don't attribute to Mr. Trump a clear vision, as we pointed out, he may not know himself what he wants to do exactly. He likes to keep promoting chaos and unpredictability. It's part of his modus operandi. But is there implicit in not just Trump, but his administration, a type of reassertion of a regionalism at the expense of Ukrainians, at the expense of Taiwanese, and many others? And what does that mean for Europe, for NATO, and for Canada? Does this mean that Canada should be skirting to get onto the US umbrella even more in this scenario? Or do we, not to resurrect the third option of Pierre Trudeau, which seemed to be a dismal failure, but, or is something like that too? Like, do we diversify, or do we, how do we react to this type of reassertion of American isolationism?
Anyone? Rosemary, Sola?
Okay. Well, great power, spheres of influence is much more the norm historically than the sort of post-1945 liberal international order we are all familiar with. And that it was certainly characteristic of American foreign policy for much of U.S. history. You look at the turn of the 20th century, the consolidation of American power regionally through the Spanish-American War, the Philippines, construction of the Panama Canal, all combined with almost complete disengagement from most, not all, but most European affairs. So in some ways, Trump is harking back to a deeply rooted strain in American foreign policy. As for NATO, I think we should bring as much as we can within the NATO orbit so as to multilateralize these discussions, avoid having them on a purely bilateral basis where we simply cannot compete with the U.S. in terms of economic and military might. In the Arctic, I think one of the biggest mistakes Stephen Harper made was rejecting a NATO role in Arctic defense. It would have been different if he'd actually taken Arctic defense seriously himself. But instead, we didn't get much. We had photo ops on Skidoos, and we had a lot of promises. We still don't have much by way of a military capability up there. We can try to link NATO to that by perhaps, and this is just blue skying here, but maybe command arrangements where the Arctic and the North Atlantic are linked, possibly greater standardization and interoperability of weaponry and armaments with other NATO members. One of the big shortcomings of NATO is that while there's a lot of pretty high quality weaponry, weapon systems, weapons platforms, there's not a lot of standardization. All of the European, well, almost all of the major European nations have their own national industrial champions to whom they direct manufacture of these systems at some cost in military efficiency. We should be pushing all of that.
We do have an online question. Rosemary, did you want to respond at all?
Just one comment.
Use your microphone.
Sorry, going back into the notions of the old style spheres of influence, when that happened, we didn't have what we had today. People moving everywhere, every day, on all kinds of modes of transportation, the interconnectivity of the internet and communications, the movements on rights and the movements on other things. I can't see how old spheres of influence can hold, at least in the old model. There may be new models, but I think they're going to be much more fluid and dynamic and unstable. But I don't worry so much about that. I worry right now that that the spread of the rules of engagement, et cetera, that they get their velocity outpaces the velocity of those against them.
I should just add as well, from a NATO point of view, they are very interested in having the Canadian participation emphasized as much as possible, especially if the U.S. starts to step back a bit. They still want to make sure we have the transatlantic aspect, that it's not just a European entity as much as possible. Sola, you have
I just want to add a little thing to what the question was before about water. I think it's an opportunity for Canada and defense to lead on water and protecting our policies around that, so that we can actually establish ourselves as those leaders globally. Because if we do that, that also gives us more leverage for us to negotiate these kind of deals. So as Rosemary is saying, this is kind of a new dynamic. Let's explore that as well as a national defense initiative.
Terrific. Did you want to take the online question? Or? Okay. Question from Pankai Mehra, question for all panelists. How can Canadian interests be best communicated, negotiated, and protected in the absence of political leadership, especially as a new U.S. administration is coming in?
Maybe I could start with that. And I mean, there isn't an absence of political leadership. We have, by virtue of our constitutional system, we have a prime minister. We have a leadership campaign. We have premiers across the country, and all of them are stepping up in one way or the other. So we're not in a vacuum of leadership at this moment. And in fact, we probably have a healthy plethora of ideas and enough clout to be able to weather whatever is going to happen over the next few days. But we will have another Liberal leader and a Liberal prime minister in power by March 3rd or 4th. So that our transition of power is constitutionally highly protected. I'm not worried about that. There's lots of voices, including ambassadors, et cetera, talking every day, and consul generals talking every day to their counterparts.
Any others?
Well, I actually am worried. There's the constitutional position and there's the political reality. And I think a prime minister who is universally perceived as a lame duck is going to have a lot of trouble dealing with a newly elected, newly emboldened Donald Trump. Yeah, we have leadership, but it's not unified leadership. It's not speaking with one voice. We have the premiers, but they're not on the same page. And I have to say, although it pains me to say this as somebody who grew up in Calgary, the conduct of the Premier of Alberta has been absolutely disgraceful in the last few years. She's completely undermined all efforts at constructing a common negotiating position and should be absolutely ashamed of herself. But the political vacuum which I see is going to be a serious problem in dealing with the new administration. It may be the best we can manage is a delaying action until we have somebody in there with a mandate and in a position of political strength.
Just to add very quickly. Maybe I'm a perennial optimist, but what I see in the back benches is that we see things in the cameras for the voters, they'll say whatever they're going to say to get the votes, but what I see in the back is a lot more cooperation than I think we realize. So I think they all realize some of the actions they're saying, but they're not necessarily going to do it. I don't think Donald Trump's going to lower the price of eggs today or anytime soon. But I think that we have to just keep that in mind, that there's a lot of political operatives and people who are lifers who are actually working to do the right thing. And so there's a moral perspective and there's a political perspective. And let's not forget the power of these groups that we don't see.
Wonderful. And with that, that concludes our panel. Rosemary, Sola, Jack, thank you so much.
Thank you to the panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have a 10-minute washroom break while we bring up the second panel. And so come back in 10 minutes, and we then pick up a very simple issue, the border and how to manage it.